So today we're going to go ahead and install a set of TRQ brake pads and rotors on the Chevy Equinox. I got to tell you, I really love the TRQ product. I've installed these on one of my other vehicles before, and the quality, reliability, and the direct replacement is absolutely perfect, and they just replaced the original equipment just right and went on nice and easy. So let's go ahead and get started on this Equinox. All right, so the first stage of this here is going ahead and getting the nut removed here, and we're using a 7/8 inch socket with a breaker bar, and we're just going to go ahead and break the nuts loose. And once we do that, we're going to go ahead and raise the vehicle off the ground and finish removing the lug nuts. All right, so now the wheel and vehicle is up in the air. We're just going to go ahead and use the socket here to go ahead and pull these lug nuts right off. You can also use an air gun or air equipment if you do have the ability to do so. It'll speed things up quite a bit for you. So now we have the lug nuts removed. I'm going to go ahead and remove the tire. Just going to go ahead and set this off to the side. What I actually did was I went up inside the vehicle and I turned the key to the on position. That way there, it actually gives us the ability to go ahead and manually just kind of adjust this here without having to get up into the vehicle. It gives us direct access to what we need to do today. We're going to start by removing these two bolts here. And this is going to remove the caliper. We're going to hang that off to the side. And then you're going to have to remove these two large bolts right here and here to remove the caliper bracket. And using a 14mm socket with a ratchet, we're going to go ahead and loosen these. You can see there was not a lot of pressure applied on that to pop those free. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove this little rubber cap right here. This is the bleeder screw. I'm going to try and pop that off there. And we're going to crack that just a little bit. And the reason for this here is when we remove this caliper, we need to compress the caliper piston in there. And because this vehicle is equipped with ABS brakes, we don't want to apply pressure back into the ABS module. It's one way we can see the fluid drip in there a little bit. So we're just going to back that up just a little bit, just to release some of the pressure. So next we're going to go ahead and remove the caliper. We're going to use a bungee cord here. I'm just going to hang it off the spring. We want to support this unit because we don't want pressure or the weight of this unit to be pulling on the flex line right here. Okay, we want to keep that pressure off of that. Next step is come on down here. We're going to go ahead and remove these brake pads. It's okay to use a small pry bar or a screwdriver doing this here. Sometimes they're stuck. As you can see, a little bit of force. All right. We have both of the pads removed, but we're going to repurpose this pad for a reason. We're going to come back to the caliper. And this is where we're going to just set the used pad in here. And we're going to use the C-clamp to go ahead and compress this caliper. We're going to put that piston back inside the caliper. So when we put the new pads and rotors on, we're going to have that extra clearance. So this is where we have that bleeder screw. We have a little bit of fluid dripping out there. And that's going to help relieve that pressure from going back up into the ABS module. It's always good to have a little drip bucket or some towels underneath catching that fluid as it drips out. And you can see here that the piston is recessing into that caliper. At that point there, you can go ahead and snug that bleeder screw back up. Next step, remove that C-clamp. And you can use that trusty bungee cord again to go ahead and wrap around and hang that up out of the way. We're going to go ahead and remove this brake caliper bracket by removing this bolt and this bolt. These are both 18mm. And I'm actually using a breaker bar on this here because this does have some pressure on it. Once again, you can use air tools, but using a breaker bar tends to be pretty easy. So I did switch over to a regular ratchet right here. All right, just remove those components. So in order to go ahead and take this rotor off, there's actually a Torx bit right here, which is actually a little star pattern. We have this in a socket form, and we like to put this on a ratchet to go ahead and loosen this. However, when you go to remove this screw, which holds the rotor onto the wheel hub, this is going to spin. We're going to go ahead and tackle that by doing this here. We're going to install a couple lug nuts by hand. So now that we just got a couple lug nuts on there, we're going to use a breaker bar here, or a pry bar. You can use either one. And just apply it here across to apply some leverage, and put your socket in there. And that way you can keep that wheel from rotating and remove that Torx bit screw. And then go ahead and remove those lug nuts. All right, so now that we have the brake caliper bracket removed, we should be able to go ahead and remove this rotor, but it seems like it's stuck on there pretty good, probably from rust. This is where safety glasses and a good size hammer will come in handy. I'm just gonna rotate that a little bit. And what you wanna do is you can use your hammer and strike the back side of the rotor, and you can rotate it. That way there you can break it free from the hub. So what we're going to do is do a comparison here. We have the original equipment here on your left-hand side, and we can see the original pads, and we have the TRQ replacement pads. You can definitely see the wear thickness between the new and the old. The groove inside is definitely packed up with some worn brake pad material. They're going to be a direct replacement on these here with the squeak tabs in the original placement. Over to the rotor, the TRQ has a fantastic cross hatching in this here, and it does have the original replacements for the Torx bit screws to hold those rotors onto the hubs. All right, so we're going to go ahead now and take care of the caliper bracket, and we need to remove these slide brackets right here. I'm just going to use a small little flathead screwdriver, and we can pry this right out. They pop right out like that. I'm going to try not to bend these or deform them at all. Next, we want to do is remove your slider pins here. You can see the rubber boots here, and they should pop right out, like so. All right, back to the slider brackets here, or the caliper bracket. I want to go ahead and use a bristle brush and clean this. Get any rust or scaly debris off. Be sure to get both sides here. All right, next step is your pad sliders. Just going to use some brake cleaning spray here. And once again, you can use your wire brush to clean this. The reason you want to clean this is where your brake pads actually slide back and forth in. So this is some hardware that is definitely necessary in doing this job and doing it correctly. All right, next step we're going to do is go ahead and clean up these slider pins. And these have the rubber boots. You want to be careful not to tear these, but you can use a small screwdriver and basically just kind of peel that rubber boot down. You want to pull that off. Slide that boot, set it down. Do the same to the other. Simply use some cleaner material here, and I'm going to go ahead and just clean these pins. What you're doing is you're just inspecting them for any type of rust or any abnormalities. Both of these are looking good. You can notice both of them are different. So you want to be careful of making sure you're getting those back in the correct position when you're putting these back together. Just clean up the boots and reinstall. So we're going to go ahead and slide this boot back on, and they just simply pop right into place. I'm going to apply a little bit of grease to this shaft here. Now it'll just simply fit back in there. Do the same here. Slide that over. Just pops right over. And go ahead and grease up this pin. So we're going to go ahead and take our pad hardware and go ahead and line this up. And then simply press right into place. And you should feel them snap on. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the step for this side. Okay, one little tip for you. When you install this hardware, you want to make sure that this hardware is flush here and not offset either way, left or right, because once you put this back on, the rotor itself can rub on the inside. It's going to cause abnormal squealing or squeaking, and you're thinking it's the pads, but it's just that your slider hardware is installed too far to one side. I want to just use a wire brush and kind of clean up around the face of the wheel hub here, because this is where the brake rotor is going to sit. So we want to make sure that there isn't any abnormalities or anything on here that's going to cause that rotor to not sit flush. If it doesn't sit flush and you put everything together and go to brake, then you might end up with a brake pedal pulsation because that rotor is not sitting flush anymore. Let's go ahead and line up the rotor. I want to make sure that we get that hole set up here and line it up with the hole on the hub face so we can go ahead and get that Torx screw on there. Just get that started. So we're just going to use the ratchet, and you want to snug this up. You don't want this super tight. You just want it snug to keep that rotor from backing off on that hub. All right, so our next step here is actually we're going to use some brake parts cleaner, and we're going to put some on a towel here or a rag, and we're going to wipe down the face of the brake rotor because TRQ does ship these out to you with a protective oil coating on it so that they come to you in the top best quality possible. We just use it here to wipe off the rotor face. And be sure to get the back side also. You just rotate that hub and rotor by hand. Because don't forget we had that ignition key turned on, so we have the ability to do this. Next is we're going to go ahead and reinstall the brake caliper bracket. I did apply a little bit of grease to these bolts here to have them slide in a little bit easier and thread in. So go ahead and push that through and get that bolt started on the back side. All right, just going to use the ratchet here. I'm going to go ahead and bottom both of these bolts out, just snug them right there. Now these do require a torque specification on there. We're going to get those numbers to you in just a moment. All right, so we're going to go ahead and torque these two bolts here. That is going to be to 140 foot-pounds. We're going to add a little bit of grease just to the sliders here where the brake pad is actually going to fit. A little bit on both sides, and then don't forget the uppers here. Here we have our TRQ set of pads. Now the back pad has the squeal tab on it. So you want to go ahead and just line up that notch with the bracket. And that should line right up in the upper slide here. Do the same thing with this here. We're now going to go ahead and get this caliper installed so you can release that bungee cord. Just get that out of the way. So you're going to slide that caliper over. At the same time, you can slide your slider pins in. Just tap those on. And go ahead and start these by hand. And run those right in. Get the top one here. Line that right up. We're going to go ahead and tighten up these bolts using a torque wrench to 20 foot-pounds. It's using a 14 millimeter. We're going to come back to this bleeder screw, and you can see the brake fluid starting to drip out. The purpose of this here is we want to just try and get that brake fluid to come through and eliminate any air bubbles that are in there. We got a solid stream of fluid coming out, so we're going to go ahead and snug that up. Don't over tighten it. We're going to go ahead and pump the brakes on the inside and see how they feel. It should take about 3 to 4 pumpings or pressings of that pedal to go ahead and get that feeling back in. So now we checked the brakes and we pumped them up. We're going to go ahead and just put that cap back on that bleeder screw. Go ahead and get that wheel mounted. Like so. We're just going to get the lug nuts put on. Always start your lug nuts by hand. Get them threaded on a little bit. With it still up in the air, you can just simply just kind of snug these. And once these are snugged, our final step is going to be to put the vehicle down on the ground. Use the vehicle weight itself to keep the wheel from rotating, and do our final torque spec. The torque spec should be roughly about 140 foot-pounds. Be sure to do your cross pattern. Just double check your final spec. If you're looking for quality aftermarket parts that fit every time, then think TRQ, the brand that my family and I trust.